All right, welcome to episode 20 of the AMT podcast. I know it's been a while. For those that follow me on Twitter will know I've been traveling a lot over the past month or so. And I did pack my microphone anticipating that I'd have the time to record some episodes. But literally I was flying and moving around so often. By the time we landed and put our bags down and acclimatized ourselves to a location, we were already on the move to the next place. So just about managed to find time to trade. And even then it was only an hour or two here and there. So we flew to Brazil first. I went to Rio de Janeiro, stayed on Copacabana Beach. And that was really cool. It's one of those places where you see it in the movies. You hear about Brazil all the time. So to actually go there was kind of surreal. And having said that, I was a bit on edge because you hear a lot about the violent crime and so forth. And having seen movies like Pixotti and City of God, I know they're just films, but there's nothing else to go by. So I made sure to leave all my expensive belongings at home, barring the camera. And at the end of the day, it's a poor country. And if you're going to make yourself a target amongst locals by walking around carrying expensive items, you're going to stick out like a sore thumb. So it's important to do your best to blend in with the locals, and turned out to be absolutely fine, even though they could still spot a tourist a mile off. Everyone was cool. The locals were super friendly, warm, upbeat, despite being heckled by poor street vendors trying to flog sweets and flip-flops or what have you. They're poor at the end of the day. They're trying to earn a living, and we made sure to check with our hotel where to go, where not to go, and all the tours were guided anyway, so it was super safe. Now, the one thing you have to see when you go to Rio is the Christ, the Redeemer statue. It's just an architectural masterpiece, just sitting on top of this little mountain. That's kind of the landscape of Rio de Janeiro. It's loads of little mountains and, buildings, like clusters of buildings between them. And it's positioned in such a way where you can just see it from almost anywhere in the city. And it just so happens that the one bloody day that we go to see it, we're stuck right in the middle of a cloud. So we could just about see the feet and the mid-torso. So that was really annoying. But yeah, I'm going to put a video up on YouTube for you guys to see. And then from there, we went to Sugarloaf Mountain, saw a bit of the forest, went to the mall, the beach, and Copacabana Palace. So kind of ticked off all the touristy stuff in literally a matter of days. So after Brazil, we went to Peru. International flights only go to Lima, which is the capital, and didn't get to see much from there. But from there we flew to Cusco, which is historically the capital for the Inca Empire, for those history buffs wondering. And as soon as we landed there, I mean literally within half an hour of getting there and getting in a cab, my head started to hurt and I had problems breathing. And when we got to the hotel, I told the lady at the desk, and she chuckled and informed me that we're about 3,000 feet above sea level. So the air is thinner. And she pointed to the corner of the room where there was this big jar of dry leaves. And she told me, that's coca. Drink that and you'll be fine in a few days. And I thought, what, am I going to get high off this? And she said, no, but it helps with the breathing. And apparently it's a natural remedy. So coca is the same plant that, when processed correctly, turns to cocaine. The dry, unprocessed version is the coca leaf, which is totally legal and safe. You just pour some hot water over it and you drink it like it tastes like green tea. Whether it worked or not, I can't say. What I do know is I had to pee a lot. And the very next day we climbed Rainbow Mountain. And like I said, it takes a few days to acclimatize. And I was sick as a dog. It's like over 5,000 feet above sea level. So the trek itself isn't too bad, but my head was pounding. It was cold. I couldn't breathe, and it was just a nightmare. It was beautiful. It's actually a new attraction. Apparently the mountain started changing colors due to the mineralogical composition on the slopes and the summits. But man, it's brutal if you're not acclimatized to the air. And it took me like a day to recover, but thankfully after that I became adjusted. And from there we went to Olite Tambo, I think I pronounced that correctly, which is home to one of the 7 wonders of the world, Machu Picchu, which, by the way, is only a few thousand feet above sea level. So that ended up being a walk in the park. But it was mesmerizing, honestly, to see a city built thousands of feet high in the mountains, constructed out of rock, and to see the walkways built into the mountains really makes you wonder what they knew back then without today's engineering and technology. So that's something that should be on everyone's bucket list for sure. But yeah, when you're in Peru, you really feel like you're a world away. Yes, there's a lot of European influence. They speak Spanish. A lot of people are mixed blood between the natives and the Spanish. The architecture, the food, everything, it's very influenced European, but it still feels like it just feels so different to anywhere else I've ever been. And I don't know anything about Latin American cuisine. I know a lot about South Asian, East Asian, Mediterranean, uh, European food. I don't know anything about Latin American food, so I didn't know what to expect. But I can say it's probably has the best food I've ever had in any place. Not only is it fresh, it's just super tasty. Everything's bursting with flavor, and you kind of take for granted eating in America or eating here in Britain that a lot of the food is very highly processed. They use a lot of seed oils, a lot of coloring. Over there, everything's natural and it really makes a difference. So you have to taste it to understand. But honestly, the food was absolutely out of this world. Even when we went to Lima, which apparently is famous for food, we were just staying in Holiday Inn overnight, and we ordered some sea bass and some salmon, and it was the best sea bass and salmon I've ever had. I kid you not, it was Michelin star level. It was that good. It was just so buttery and soft and flavorful. And this is a Holiday Inn, and it felt like we were in a 5-star restaurant. Absolutely unbelievable. That's just testament to the standard of food there, how consistent it is no matter where you go. But anyway, from there we went to Costa Rica, where it was just lashing down with rain. So we got out of there and then went to Cancun, Mexico. Now, I've been there a couple times before, and the place just never disappoints. It's paradise. White sandy beaches. It's literally like baby powder, the sand. And the turquoise water, 30-degree heat, sipping pina coladas and doing shisha by the pool, just unwinded for about a week. That's really my idea of a holiday. And from there, we flew to Miami, and we stayed in South Beach. And we brought the rain with us for a couple of days. But we just enjoyed the nightlife, did a bit of shopping. Florida's great for shopping. So many outlets there for all the big fashion houses. And I rarely ever go shopping. I hate browsing through shops, but literally my wardrobe is on its knees. I just ended up buying the essentials, new pants, socks, and some golf trousers. But from there we headed home. So it was a real whirlwind of a month. And it's good to break from routine and do something different and travel from time to time. You don't necessarily have to do it on that scale or for that long, but when you're spending so much time in front of the screen, it's easy to become stale. So it's good to take breaks from time to time. And gonna take another couple of days off from Thursday. Gonna head up to Nottingham, show some support for my mate Owen, who I've spoken with actually on this podcast. If you want to check that episode out, he's a professional golfer and he's playing the Tour Championship to close his golf season. So hopefully he brings it home. But just easing my way. Well, I said I was easing my way back into the flow of things on the trading front, but I've really hit the ground running. I've already made about $2,000 over the last 5 days. Had a student join in on my live stream on Saturday, which was jam-packed, full of action, from the Australian racing right through to the UK racing at Ascot, where I scored my biggest win of the year, landed a superb lay bet on the short-priced favourite. Ground was a bit soft and the horse just couldn't see it home at the final stretch, so made $1,000 off that lay bet, off that one race alone. Made another 200 or so quid off the women's boxing, another couple £100 on the golf, another couple £100 on the cricket, the World Cup side, and a few hundred off the racing. So just going to ride out this nice period for as long as I can. But with that out the way, today I want to talk about the best trader that I've ever met, that I got to see live in action. I'm not going to mention his name because I don't have his consent. I actually haven't spoken to him in a while, but I imagine he's cracking on just fine. But the reason why I want to speak about this guy in particular is because he really put things into perspective for me as a trader. And it was a great opportunity for me to learn from someone who's at a stage where I really want to get to. And it's a lonely profession, this, and it's hard to measure how well you're doing against others. It's very easy to get stuck in your ways and thinking you're doing everything you can. So any opportunity that you get to meet other traders, I encourage you to do so. It's a good way to network and make friends and even learn a thing or two. And social media makes the world a small place. So the said person just so happens to be following me on social media, and he'd reached out. So we spoke a little bit, we met up, and we spoke about trading. And I already knew he was a seasoned veteran in our respective fields, so there was already that respect there. But as the conversation went on and we started talking numbers, I quickly realized that this guy is not just a serious heavyweight, but probably in that elite handful of customers on the exchange. I mean, I'd honestly be surprised if there's more than a handful of guys doing better than him. He's that sort of level, and he lives up the road from me. How crazy is that? And without getting into specifics, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, he makes well into the six-figure range, like multiple six figures a year he makes. I mean, I'll tell you this. I'll give you an example. He can make around 100 grand just off the summer IPL alone. So hopefully that gives you some sort of indication as to what level he operates at. And as friendly and as sociable as he was, he's intensely private. And he doesn't even go by his real name. Rather, he has a pseudonym. So I doubt very much anybody will have any clue who I'm talking about. He's kind of like this Heisenberg sort of figure for those that have seen Breaking Bad. And other than those that know him, the big boys do know him very well, in fact. And as much as I'd love to have him as a guest for you guys on the podcast, I haven't spoken to him in a while, and I don't think he'd agree to doing it anyway. Like I said, he's very private. But the reason why I've decided to talk about him is because, well, like I said, this is a very niche and lonely profession, and it's difficult to keep scorecards on how well people are doing, since people do tend to cherry pick results that they share on social media. But I've seen for myself the level he operates at, and whilst he serves as an inspiration to me, hopefully his results inspire you guys too. Hopefully he's furnished the trading arena as a living example of what's possible from trading with the right approach. And I always knew that getting to his sort of level is possible. And whilst I have high hopes for myself, actually meeting someone that actually is about that life and is making that sort of money, just having that tangible sort of proof that it's possible, it really forces you to look at yourself in a whole new different light. When you see someone more successful than you and you see what they're doing, it opens up your mind. You start questioning and scrutinizing your own approach more rigorously. So me, for example, I'm quite averse to gathering lots of data and filtering it. I try and stay away from numbers as much as possible, where I can anyway. Obviously, I'm not completely oblivious to the data. I just try and pay attention to no more than a handful of key metrics before approaching a market. I find that having too much data at my disposal, it feeds into my cognitive bias, and it's very easy to start overlaying past data onto what you're presently seeing. And I like to feel my way through the market. I like to see what's in front of me, and I'm actively looking for market overreactions to exploit. And with my experience, I have a pretty good gauge of doing that. Anyway, this trader, we'll call him Trader X. I had the privilege of actually going to his office to watch him trade a cricket game live. It was a 2020 international game, Bangladesh versus Afghanistan. Not the highest quality match, but it was still an opportunity to watch him in action before the IPL. And he gave me a bit of homework beforehand. He told me to gather as much data on the game before, and he sent me a few links. So I went ahead and gathered what I could. So I drove to his office, and by the time I got there, this is about 10 minutes before the off, he's already $3,000 up. He's already made almost 3 weeks worth of wages in about 15 minutes. Just based off the coin toss and looking at the pitch, he's already decided what the odds should be priced at, and he bets accordingly. Lo and behold, the market adjusted to where he said it would go. Now, what shocked me the most when seeing him work was his setup. I kid you not, this guy bets like a fucking brain surgeon. Excuse my language, but he literally has 3 monitors. He's got one monitor where he's funneling money through the Indian exchanges where he gets a flat rate. The second monitor is where he handles his Betfair trades. And the third monitor, which was behind us, was where he has this custom built database. So what he did was he hired a scraper. So he has a bunch of data, every single piece of data on every single bowler, batsman, pitch, and he's organized it in such a way where he could see exactly how a batsman would average against, say, a slow left-arm bowler or a pace bowler. So he could anticipate over by over how the price would move, and he had a price in mind where he thought it should be. So if the odds were ever out of whack, he'd bet accordingly and take advantage. So it was super fascinating to watch. I mean, he has every angle covered. Everything was nailed down and precise. He knew what every number on his screen meant, and he knew every stat, and he was smart enough to interpret it in such a way where he could instantly spot price discrepancies and take advantage. So it's the most sophisticated setup and approach to professional trading that I've ever seen or ever could hope to see in this line of work. And whilst that's all well and good, one of the main advantages that he has, and this is something that you probably can't teach, is that he's just a natural risk taker. He's not fazed by going big. He's happy to stick it all on the line if the occasion calls for it without bottling it. This guy is not scared of betting big, and he's not afraid of hammering short-priced favorites either if the occasion calls for it. He's a boxing fan, so we spoke about the Conor McGregor-Floyd Mayweather fight. This was a few years ago now, for those that watch boxing. It was in 2017. And Floyd was priced as something absolutely ridiculous, like 1.3. And I remember that weekend clearly because I was laughing about the fact that the Premier League was on and Bournemouth were at higher odds to beat Man City at home than Conor McGregor was to pull off the biggest upset in combat sports history. I mean, this was one of those rare occasions that gamblers and fight fans were just frothing at the mouth over. And as is so often the case in combat sports, when the media absolutely hypes and hypes and hypes a certain fighter, all rationality goes out the window. I can give countless examples, like when Holly Holm in the UFC was something like 30-1 to beat Ronda Rousey. And she went and absolutely destroyed her. Holly Holm, by the way, she's one of the greatest female boxers of all time and a kickboxing world champion. And this is when the Ronda Rousey hype train was at its absolute peak. And the 30-1 underdog absolutely batters Ronda in what was supposed to be a one-sided affair the other way around. Or more lukewarm examples were Tyson Fury, who was the underdog in the rematch against Deontay Wilder, despite the fact that he literally won 10 out of the 12 rounds in the first fight. Or even the boxing this weekend. And I tweeted about this when Clarissa Shields, arguably the greatest female boxer of all time, was the slight underdog to beat Savannah Marshall, who's our home favorite. So Savannah Marshall, by the way, she's got a very light resume. She hasn't really fought anyone. So anyone who's a combat sports fan will know that boxing often throws up these outrageously, ridiculously biased odds when it comes to the home fighter. And Clarissa Shields literally was it just steam trained down to 1.1 from evens. So I made a couple £100 off that. I wish I went harder. Anyway, the McGregor-Mayweather fight, I thought I did well on it. I made a good 4-figure amount. And it was actually the night before I flew out to Bali for holiday. So that was all paid for. But Trader X, the guy that I'm talking about, he had around 200 grand on Floyd. And he was joking about how this could go horribly wrong if the fight was fixed. But that's just testament to the kind of balls this guy has when it comes to betting and risk taking. And yes, a lot of people are going to argue that he's got a bigger bankroll. But I personally know some big punters. Well, I know 2 guys who happily shell out 5 figures on fights. But to put multiple 6-figure amounts on a boxing match, I mean, that's just different kind of balls altogether. And I remember there was another occasion, and this was more recently after I'd met him. It was a unification fight in the lightweight division. It was Jack Catterall versus Josh Taylor for all the belts at lightweight. And Catterall was the heavy underdog, and he thoroughly outboxed Taylor. And given how dirty boxing is, the odds never go to 1.01 on the underdog, even if he's clearly won, especially in the UK where the judging is absolutely bent. And Trader X calls me and goes, shall I whack five grand down on Catterall? He was around 1.2 at the time. Clearly won the fight, right? But the judges hadn't announced the scorecards yet. He was trading at 1.2. Trader X calls me, shall I put 5 grand down? And by this time, I'd traded out of my position, and I said to him, don't do it. I've seen enough bullshit decisions in my time. And just as a bit of context, Josh Taylor was like the blue-eyed boy of Scotland. He was their superstar, the network moneymaker, and they had big plans for him in the future. So nobody really expected Catterall to box the absolute ears off of him. Anyway, lo and behold, most bent decision in modern boxing history happens, and Josh Taylor wins the decision. The judges' scorecards, in fact, were so bad that one of the judges had their licenses revoked, and Trader X didn't listen to me in this instance, so he went and lost 5k on him. And whereas most of us would be absolutely livid, he just shrugs and goes, oh, well, you just keep backing value and you'll be all right. So the reason why I bring this example up is because whilst you can learn how to gather and break down and interpret data, one thing you can't teach someone is their appetite for risk. Everyone's tolerance is different, and there's many reasons for it. Financial stability, personality. There's a lot of external factors that play an influence. And it's not as though Trader X was living a happy-go-lucky single life. He has a house, a family, bills to pay, external financial pressures that has to be met. Yet he still freely and willingly puts it all on the line when the occasion calls for it. And if it doesn't pay off, he shrugs his shoulders and says, oh well, just keep backing value and we'll be okay in the long run. And that was it. It was never personal for him. If he loses a bet, he just chalks it up to the game and moves on. He did the same thing in that Afghanistan-Bangladesh game, by the way, where he was 3 grand up before the first ball was bowled. Ended up giving a lot back. The match didn't pan out as we thought it would. But that's it. He moves on. He doesn't even think about it. He doesn't dwell on it. And that's just testament to his character. Completely, totally level-headed, balanced and objective. He's just a natural. He was born with the perfect tool set to succeed in this line of work. There was nothing manufactured about him. Nothing that he seemingly ever had to change or learn. And on this podcast and on Twitter, I so often talk about how part of becoming profitable as a trader is to battle against a lot of your natural tendencies like fear of loss and greed and so on. And I speak a lot from experience because I definitely wasn't born with a tool set to succeed in this game. And that's okay because I started the same way that 99% of people start out. But the one thing that I did have going for me was the fact that, the one thing that I do pride myself on is that I never, ever, ever give up. I'm a stubborn bastard in that sense. And I just keep coming back. And you need that kind of grit, especially when it comes to trading, because this line of work will beat you down, it will grind you down, and it will strip you naked. Every time you think that you've cracked it, as soon as you get arrogant and deviate from the plan, you'll get humbled. So I've had to come up the hard way in that sense. Like I said, I didn't have the tools. I had to build myself up into a trader. And I've had to do so the slow bullet cart method. And because I'm a very impulsive person, I'm a slave to my bad habits. So every time I set a plan for myself, instead of sticking with it, from time to time, I deviate from it, mess up, and come back a few steps down the ladder and then climb back up again. So my laziness and arrogance cost me a lot in the beginning, and it really slowed down my learning curve. And there was no one to check me or keep me in line or show me the way, so to speak. And my journey was part of the inspiration to starting a YouTube channel, Twitter page, and my live streaming course where I share a lot about my journey, what to do and what not to do, because it should absolutely not take as long as I did to get where I am. And I know for a fact that providing you're hardworking and have the grit, you can become profitable a lot quicker than I did if you're shown the way. So instead of taking the slow bullock cart method like I did, I can show you the aeroplane route, so to speak. So yeah, there really was no one out there showing their methods when I started out. And in fact, I wanted to be a futures trader. You know, I applied to a bunch of proprietary trading firms, but it happened at a time when a lot of them stopped offering seed capital and only accepted traders who were self-funded and could pay their own desk fees, none of which I could afford. And that's kind of how I stumbled into doing this full time. But anyway, without getting off tangent, with Trader X, he's never had such issue. He's never had any of the issues I've had. He is what I believe one of the chosen few who's just managed to hit the ground running. He's got all that. He's born with all the attributes that are needed to succeed in this line of work. And that's not to say he hasn't worked hard, obviously, but he's just got that it factor. He opened a Betfair account, loaded up his bankroll, pulled the lever, and watched the money come flying in. And he's the type of guy that you'd walk right past in the street and not have a clue how successful he is. There's nothing flash or arrogant. He isn't really interested in indulging in any material pursuits. And that's another key to his success, by the way, because making money and keeping money are two different games, and he plays both very well. He's just a guy that enjoys winning. He's good at it and very used to it. So the second time I met him, he offered to come and watch me in action. So it was now my turn to show what I'm about. And I was a bit nervous, I got to admit. I'm used to live streaming with students, but when there's someone sitting next to you, watching you, it feels like they're breathing down your neck, and it gets kind of awkward when you're sitting around for extended periods of time and not placing a bet and having to explain yourself. But obviously he's no novice, so he understood that, and thankfully I did make money in front of him that session. Last thing I wanted to do was embarrass myself, but what he did do was he was asking me a lot of questions about my approach. We were trading racing, and he asked me about which jockeys I look out for, the trainers, the horses, what charts I use. And I said to him, literally, I pay attention to none of those things. I told him I just watched the race. I've seen enough races now to know what cues to look for in play. And I know what to look for in the price action pre-race. So I ignore a lot of the data. And I mentioned this earlier, actually, and I even dedicated an entire podcast episode to this where I explain the difference between cold trading and hot trading. And I'm much more of a cold trader. I'm more of a Betfair specialist where I can look at the flow of money and look at the charts and profit both ways, as opposed to taking a data-driven approach to the game. But even though that's not my style, he did give me an awful lot to think about. And he, in fact, gave me some very useful pointers, which I can't talk about on here. But he actually showed me ways that I can level up my trading. So I have to thank him for that. You know, he really gave me a new lease of life, a different outlook, and encouraged me to take my approach more seriously and really tighten up some of the screws, because as driven and as hardworking as I am, I definitely wasn't operating at my full potential. And sometimes we know that. Sometimes we ignore things because we're so stuck in our ways and so stuck in a rut. It's too much effort to bring things to the light and take action. And he encouraged me to do that. He encouraged me and inspired me to take a much more holistic approach. And he also inspired me to get a lot more aggressive with my betting, because that's one thing I've really struggled with when it comes to leveling up, especially in horse racing. But in my defense, part of my strategy relies solely upon the liquidity and volume of a market. So I'm trying to use stakes that go unnoticed so I can go about my business without spooking the market or having to chase my way out of a position if it goes against me. So that's kind of what I struggle with at the minute when it comes to racing. But with cricket, I haven't had that issue because it's way, way, way more liquid. And I have gradually increased my staking over time. And my wins have been getting bigger. But yeah, like I said, on the other hand, there is that mental aspect as well, where I have plateaued and become very accustomed to a certain way of staking on racing. And if I do try and increase it, it's hard for me to do so without being affected mentally. I start trading from a place of fear and start getting more defensive and cutting winners early. So those are things that I definitely do have to overcome if I want to level up. But as far as my interactions go with Trader X, it was a real eye-opener. And it was just cool to actually meet someone who's at a stage in his trading where I would very much like to be. And again, the only way to learn is by learning from people better than you. That way you can see what they're doing. You can see how they approach things. And then you can compare that to yourself. It's so difficult to point out your own mistakes, but it's much easier when someone else has a look at what you're doing and offers new perspective. But you have to drop your pride and your ego, and you have to be willing to learn and listen if you are going to improve. So, yeah. Hopefully that's some inspiration for you guys. So, yeah, thanks for listening. We'll wrap it up here. Hopefully this has inspired you and shown you what's possible. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I'll see you in the next episode.